This is, who am I speaking to, please? Okay, Deborah, my name is John Mattei. I'm with Greenpeace. Can I give you some embargoed information, embargoed till 10:15 today? Okay, on 10 o'clock there's going to be an action at Valentine Pier against the USS Merrill, M-E-R-R-I-L-L. USS Merrill, M-E-R-R-I-L-L, which is a nuclear-armed warship. Gary, go for it if you can. Gary, go for it.
Hey, stand clear.
Get in front that way, go that way a little bit. You're fine, Ash, you're fine. You're fine.
Get a shot of the police boat, okay? The call time between Yankee 9340, November 110763, privacy please. 736-0321.
Immediately you have dangerous weapons on board, nuclear weapons on board, and we request that you leave this port immediately. Stay clear. Watch your eyes.
Pardon?
Anybody else interested? We demand that you leave port with your nuclear weapons. You'll be welcome without them. Take your nuclear weapons out of Vancouver Harbour. The people of Vancouver have voted against having nuclear weapons in this harbour. It's fairly straightforward democratic request. You guys are always talking about freedom and democracy. Why don't you respect the wishes of the people?
All right.
Ready to go, Ellen?
Ellen, you got anything to say?
Good afternoon. It's been a day of environmental protest around the world. The Greenpeace organization was involved in 2 of those protests. In Vancouver, it harassed a U.S. Navy ship, and in England, it succeeded in turning back a Soviet ship laden with Canadian PCBs. And in a first for the Soviet Union, protesters marched on a huge nuclear installation in that country. Our first report comes from Vancouver. It wasn't quite a battle on the high seas, but a confrontation between Greenpeace and the U.S. Navy has resulted in 6 arrests. Greenpeace demonstrators surrounded the aircraft carrier USS Independence as it entered English Bay. Greenpeace says the vessel is carrying nuclear weapons. Efforts to hamper the American ship's arrival in Vancouver started well before sunrise. In the quiet of the early morning, as most of the city still sleeps, Greenpeace prepares for war. With 4 Zodiacs, 2 boats and 20 protesters, it'll take on the American Navy.
This is, it's maybe a long path, but I believe that the people of New Zealand have managed to stop all nuclear weapons coming into their country, and I believe we can do the same in Canada, and this is part of that process.
The small armada charges out into English Bay, as in the distance an outline of the American warship USS Independence looms on the horizon. One of the ship's 6 Sea King helicopters hovers as a Zodiac taunts the 80,000-ton vessel as it lumbers through the water. Soon it drops anchor and police are ready for what's to come.
We want the other people of Vancouver to do whatever they can, whatever it might be, to stop these things coming in. It's just too disgusting to accept.
You have nuclear bombs on board. Vancouver is a nuclear weapons-free zone. Please turn around and leave our harbor right now.
The first tactic is to send a member up the vessel's anchor chain. Carrier crew members respond by pulling out the fire hoses. Soon the arrests begin, first with the man on the anchor chain, then a member chained to a ladder on the stern of the ship, and 4 people in a Zodiac who have been spray painting the vessel.
100 nuclear warheads. All nuclear weapons are a threat to humanity, and we demand that these warheads be taken out of Canadian territory.
Greenpeace says their message is getting out. They'll keep up their protests, and more Canadians should join in.
I think the Americans have got the message because they're very secretive about their visits now. Sometimes they come in at night and they are no longer inform us when they're coming. They're aware that people of Vancouver don't want to see them here.
The Zodiacs circle the ship one last time and get yet another soaking from the crew and then head off. They say every time the federal government lets an American warship in, it's a slap on the face of Vancouver residents.
A group of Vancouver swimmers launched a peaceful protest against the presence of the USS Independence in English Bay. Greenpeacers were on hand, though they were not directly involved in organizing the demonstration. The swimmers were athletes, lifeguards, and concerned citizens.
I'll be back in a little while.
The swimmers met at Jericho Beach, where they were loaded onto boats provided by Greenpeace. The sun still hadn't come up as the group made its way toward English Bay. Greenpeace provided the transportation and the moral support. The tiny crafts were dwarfed by the ominous aircraft carrier, but the swimmers were undaunted.
Vancouver is a nuclear weapons-free zone. You have nuclear weapons on board. Please leave right now.
And the swim had begun. It wasn't a marathon, and it wasn't a race. It was a group of people out to make a point. They're upset at seeing a warship in Vancouver Harbor, and they're disappointed with Ottawa's failure to respond to Vancouver City Council's resolution to make the city a nuclear-free zone.
The USS Independence is a Forrestal-class aircraft carrier with a complement of 44 aircraft and 6 Sea King helicopters. According to Greenpeace, the vessel stores nuclear bombs for use by the attack aircraft on board. It also holds nuclear depth charges for anti-submarine warfare. Aircraft carriers usually carry about 100 nuclear weapons.
Among the swimmers was a local politician, Vancouver Alderman Libby Davies.
The presence of this huge carrier and all that it represents, its military might, the weapons that it is no doubt carrying on board, I think, it's just a violation of the feeling that people in Vancouver have.
The entire flotilla circled the vessel one more time before heading home. Hollyburn shuttles crew members from ship to shore during the stay. Sailors say Vancouver stages the most energetic protest, but they don't mind.
You don't know what you've got till it's gone. They made paradise, put up a parking lot. Hey, farmer, farmer, put away that DDT now. And leave the spots on my apples and give me back the burgundy. Well, don't it always seem to go? You don't know what you've got till it's gone. You pay paradise, put up a parking lot. All late last night, I heard that scream door slam. And a big yellow tractor came and pushed around my house, pushed around my land. But don't it always seem to go? You don't know what you...
Wow, look at that thing.
Vancouver is a nuclear weapons-free zone. You have nuclear weapons on board. You are violating our democracy. We are not against Americans. We are against nuclear weapons. As long as you remain here in our waters, you put our environment and our lives at risk. We insist that you honor our desire to remain a nuclear weapons-free zone and leave our harbor immediately. Take the message home to your government that you are not welcome here as long as you continue to bring nuclear weapons with you.
It seems to me that the government of Canada is forcing all of us to resort to civil disobedience in order to get the message across. My hope is that we're going to have 100,000 people in this city committing acts of civil disobedience so that the government of Canada stops violating our democratic rights and stops allowing these monstrous ships into our harbors. These people have no right to bring nuclear weapons into Vancouver. The democratic right of the Vancouverites is to make Vancouver a nuclear weapons-free zone. This ship is violating the democratic right. The pro-democracy movement that we saw in China will someday come to Canada. Thank you for being here.
And it seems to me that we have to recognize and we have to understand that it is the Canadian government that is inviting this nuclear warship into our harbor. They are here at the invitation of our Canadian government. And I am committed to changing the politicians and throwing out the politicians who abide by that policy. We have to get rid of Mulrooney, we have to get rid of the Mary Collinses, and we have to dump those people and say that you are not acting in the best interest of Canada as a peacemaking nation. And I think that a lot of our pressure and a lot of our activism also has to be directed at the Canadian government. That's what we're doing in the city of Vancouver, and I know that with the help of Greenpeace and the thousands of individuals that we will do that. I have great faith in the power of the peace movement to change the minds and the attitudes of the politicians. Thank you.
The greatest threat to our environment, to this planet, is the madness of nuclear weapons.
Right on!
I consider it a privilege to be able to be here today with my fellow citizens, artists, singers, teachers, and others who have spoken out for peace. And I want to particularly pay tribute, as I'm sure we all do this evening, to the courage and the strength and the commitment of Greenpeace, and in particular those who were so brave in the wee hours of the morning on Wednesday that came out here in Zodiacs. I think we should all thank them for the contribution that they have made. I want to say, particularly to those on the independents, that we as Canadians are calling upon our government to put an end to policies of destruction and death, policies which, as Libby Davies said, involve the expenditure of billions of dollars. How many hospitals and schools could we build with the dollars that went into this ship? How many hospitals and schools?
The Prime Minister and his son Nicholas spent the day rubbernecking the flying circus from the stands, which included lots of U.S. warplanes. But during his BC trip, Mulroney chose to cancel a planned visit to the U.S. aircraft carrier Independence, visiting Vancouver Harbor. Members of the Vancouver City Council and of Greenpeace were protesting the visit of the nuclear carrier. Clearly, the Prime Minister's image makers didn't relish a run-in with them. Craig Oliver, CTV News in Vancouver.
Vancouver is a nuclear weapons-free zone. We have nuclear weapons on board. We ask you to leave our harbor right now. We're not against Americans, we're against the nuclear weapons. Violating our democracy by being here with nuclear weapons. Vancouver is a nuclear weapons-free zone. The people of Vancouver do not want nuclear weapons here. Please leave our harbor. Vancouver is a nuclear weapons-free zone. We ask you to leave our harbor right now. We're not against Americans, we're against nuclear weapons that you bring into our harbor. The people of Vancouver do not want nuclear weapons in our harbor. Please leave right now. USS Constellation has had 9 accidents since 1960. Last year you had a major fire on board. We do not want an accident in Vancouver. USS Constellation, we ask that you leave Vancouver right now. You have 100 nuclear bombs on board. Vancouver is a nuclear weapons-free zone. You have no right to bring nuclear bombs into our city. Stop it! Hey, stop it! Stop it! USS Constellation has had 9 accidents since 1960, including fires, explosions, collisions. Please leave our harbor right now. We don't want an accident in Vancouver. Hey, John, keep strong, keep courageous. Way to go, way to go.
Okay, the trip. Let's look at this first, and we'll do that. Okay, here it is. It's a rubber mat. And you'd want to, presumably you'd want to have your piece of cardboard, 2 pieces of cardboard at the top here.
Yeah.
So.
And then it should sit flat.
Now. Well, okay, well, we've got enough time while one person is holding it up. The other person can triddle it down. It's fine, isn't it?
The Canadian Peace Alliance represents peace organizations right across Canada. There are people on this vessel right now, this boat, that are from right across Canada, and they'll probably want to have something to say themselves later on. I think it's very important that everybody in the country of Canada recognizes what sits in the ports, the devastation that could be created by these vessels sitting in these ports. I wish to, on behalf of the Canadian Peace Alliance, thank Greenpeace, who are a member organization of the Canadian Peace Alliance, for organizing this event today and bringing us out. The next person that's going to address you is David Kraft, the representative of Greenpeace.
The Canadian government has declared and repeatedly declares that Canada is a non-nuclear weapons nation, and yet we regularly invite nuclear weapons into populated centers on both coasts. We have documented research indicating that the frequency, the severity, and the extent of naval accidents and naval accidents involving nuclear weapons is much greater than the authorities admit, and yet the Canadian government continues to simply ignore the entire problem. The City of Vancouver, through its City Council, has asked the federal government to declare this port nuclear weapons free. We're here campaigning on that issue.
I'm Jim Stanford from the Disarmament Coalition in Ottawa, which until recently I thought was the nation's capital, where our defense and foreign policies were made. When the Canadian government in Ottawa says there's no nuclear weapons in Canada, I thought that meant there's no nuclear weapons in Canada. But I guess our foreign policy is made somewhere else. This ship is an affront to our environment, it's an affront to peace, and it's a slap in the face of Canadian sovereignty. That's why it's got to go home.
We're about to do some actions here. We just tagged the side of the aircraft carrier with radiation symbols. It's our hope that all aircraft carriers of the nuclear navies will be covered in radiation symbols hereafter, and we're doing our part. Yeah, we're going to take a closer look. We want to emphasize that if hazardous waste has to be regulated in its transportation over the seas, then surely nuclear weapons and nuclear reactors should also be marked as hazardous waste. So it's our hope not to do property damage, but to accurately and effectively label these ships.
Morning, Constellation. Vancouver, as you probably know by now, is a nuclear weapons-free zone. Please leave. This is it. Game 1 of the World Series. We're hoping to watch the game in a nuclear weapons-free zone. Therefore, you'll have to leave. Giants all the way. This is a public service announcement. Will the gentleman driving the large gray aircraft carrier, license number 64, please move your vessel? It's blocking the view and obstructing the democratic process in Vancouver. Thank you.
Today, the protesters appeared in provincial court charged with mischief. After hearing testimony from the ship's navigator and a former Navy Rear Admiral, Judge Wally Craig found Rolf Reynolds, the man who climbed the anchor chain, guilty, but dismissed charges against the others because the operation of the vessel was not interfered with, although he admitted the acts bordered on mischief. Judge Craig went on to say he finds it remarkable that the Canadian government sees fit to invite this type of equipment in Vancouver, considering the serious concerns citizens have. He went on to speculate there would be more protests, and he could understand why.
Provincial Judge Wallace Craig acquitted the 5 of mischief in the decision that gives Greenpeace an unexpected boost in its battle to keep nuclear warships out of the harbor.
There were smiles all around outside the court this afternoon after 5 of 6 protesters were acquitted outright by a judge who stated that their actions were not mischief, but lawful protest.
Yeah, I think that was the right decision. I think he was correct, and it's not mischief what these people were doing. He seemed to say that given the feeling of the people of Canada, why was the government inviting these ships to be here in the first place? And he also said that Canadians were quite complacent. In fact, maybe had a reputation for being the most even-tempered and complacent of all the nations. And what these people did was done out of a sense of duty.
That compelled them to board Zodiacs in the early hours of the morning last August. They traveled to the spot where the giant USS Independence was anchored. One climbed the anchor chain and others spray-painted radiation symbols to dramatize their fear that the ship carried nuclear weapons. I guess you all feel pretty pleased.
Feel great.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Is it a surprise to you, or?
Well, I'm glad that it turned out this way. It could have gone any way, you know. The way it worked out is definitely in the favor of Greenpeace, because now it means that what we did was justified.
It's quite good what he said. Maybe our government should take a stand and not invite these ships anymore, otherwise there will be more protests, and I can guarantee that I'll be part of any more protests if these ships continue to come here, and I hope more Canadians take part of that.